Hey y'all, Josh's Severe Weather. Happy Monday to you. Labor Day here, and right in the heart of hurricane season, we've got lots to talk about. I'm a meteorologist in the Raleigh area, and I am going to be talking about tropics. I'm going to be talking about a future hurricane, which we do need to keep an eye on here, especially in the eastern United States, Bermuda, and the Caribbean islands. So I'm going to break things down for you guys, talk about some trends, some prospects, where the models show it, where I think it could go, and how it could impact you. So here is a look at the graphic, and I just want to show you guys right now that we are likely going to have a hurricane impacting the Caribbean islands. The next name on the list is Lee. Now, it is likely going to develop here towards the middle of this week into a depression and then a tropical storm. And then as we get to the weekend and beyond, we're likely to have a long track hurricane, perhaps a major hurricane, maybe even up to Category 4. And gosh, I mean, I don't know about Category 5, but I guess, as we've seen with the last couple of storms, Franklin and Idalia, it doesn't take a lot under very warm ocean waters. So right now, the majority of the model guidance says this is going to try to recur, but not all the models show that. I'm going to talk about why that is. And if you are on the eastern seaboard, you do need to watch Lee. Right now, the majority of the models keep it away from the East Coast, but not all of them do. So until that happens, nothing is a guarantee, with this still being about 10 to 14 days away. If you're in the Gulf of Mexico and Florida, I don't think this is going to be your storm. You still want to watch it, but I don't think it's going to be your storm. So that's what I'm going to talk about here in the video, just kind of a look at what is steering this system and where it could go. Now, here's the list, and we're about halfway through it. We just had Katia here in the East Atlantic. Lee is the next storm. And then I do think we could have Margot after that, following in the wake of Lee, maybe even Nigel after that. So here is a look at our satellite imagery, and I'm going to show you the players on the map here first before we break down where they're going to go. This is the remains of Idalia, which tracked across Florida last week, developed here in the Caribbean, then came up in this direction, hit the Big Bend as a major Category 3 hurricane, then emerged off the Carolina coast as a tropical storm. It lost its tropical characteristics when it got halfway between North Carolina and Bermuda, and tried to form a tropical low, but that didn't happen. And now the system is riding around an upper level low towards Nova Scotia. It should turn back out here after making another loop. Now, a few days ago, this upper low here that was driving it here was predicted to be down in here, and that meant the track was going to be more uncertain, maybe even back in this direction or up in this direction. But the upper low that we've been tracking managed to remain far enough north to drive it well to the east. And it is tailing back towards Sable Island, towards eastern Nova Scotia, but at this point, not tropical. Now, we do have still Tropical Storm Gert, which we all thought was a waste of the name on August 20th. Gert was down in here, looked like complete junk, got sheared apart, and somehow became a tropical storm. But the remaining storm clouds found a way to survive after Franklin left, and squeezing in this direction. And now we do have a low-end tropical storm, but at least we have a reason to not say it's a waste of a name. It certainly deserved the name. But Idalia right here, Gert right here, we're going to see Gert coming around and getting absorbed by Idalia. Idalia is a bigger storm, going to eat it up. And the two are going to track northwest toward Nova Scotia, but make a bend to the right at the very last moment here. So they're going to be kind of dancing with each other and then turning away. Elsewhere, we do have Tropical Storm Katia, which is weakening. The waters are now cooler here in the eastern Atlantic. There's some dry air here in the way you can see. And this will likely become a remnant low here in a couple of days as it tracks kind of in this direction and then dies. Now, the next system on the map I am watching for you guys is Invest 95L. This is going to be entering an area where it can develop, and perhaps develop very quickly when it gets into this region, into not just a tropical storm, but likely a hurricane. So we do need to watch things in Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, and the Leeward Islands, as there are some models that come pretty close. Even though the majority of them do stay a little bit north of the islands, it will be in the neighborhood towards the weekend and early next week around this time. So that's what I'll be watching for you guys here. The good news for us here on the East Coast, we've got a huge ridge of high pressure in place that is keeping things hot and protecting us here in the southern and eastern United States from any tropical trouble. The Gulf is about as quiet as you could expect here for early September, and the Caribbean not far behind it, as we have a lot of sinking air in place in here. Now, that is going to be set to change as we get into next week and the upper level pattern flips. We've got a trough that's brought severe weather to Nevada and Utah. That is going to be lifting up into the Dakotas and into the upper Midwest today. That'll track across the eastern United States, and it will start breaking down the ridge we'll see a break in the heat coming here in a couple days in the northeast. And then where that trough goes will dictate the future of what should be lee here in a few days. Is it going to try to turn this way east of Bermuda? Is it going to try to hit Bermuda? Or is it going to find its way in here where we have to keep an eye on it on the east coast? And that is what I'm going to break down for you guys here in this video. So here's a look at Zoom Earth. You can see a very active map last week, but really we just have two players on the field. Katia, not really a player anymore. Gert, not really a player. It's Idalia, and that is heading away here to Nova Scotia, and then our next low pressure system. And oh, by the way, we'll have more coming in behind it. Here's a look at the current map. Katia on the way out. Gert still a tropical storm, not for much longer though. Idalia, not pictured, is actually bigger than those two storms. It is no longer tropical, but it is big enough to be an impact here to eastern Nova Scotia and Newfoundland in the coming days, taking its time moving northwestward and then turning away. But the area that we really do need to watch closely is this tropical disturbance. AL95 is the model designation, the Atlantic Basin, invest number 95. We go from 90 to 99, then those reset back to 90. Since I guess they think we won't have more than 9 invests at a time. I really hope not. Behind it, we will probably have invest 96 coming off of Africa in a couple of days. That certainly shows some signs of development in the future here once 95L leaves the area. Now, this area of red shows where it could become a tropical depression or storm. There's a 60% chance that happens between now and early Wednesday morning, and a 90% chance it happens between now and next Monday morning. I think it'll be somewhere in here when it becomes a depression, then in here a tropical storm, and then in here a hurricane, as waters are very warm and wind shear is low. We do have some wind shear now, but it is forecast to lessen over time. Real quick, here's a look at the water vapor image, and you can see that little upper low that I was talking about here diving south and east, and that is going to be driving the remains of Idalia northwestward for some time, and then a turn back to the northeast. Then we see a front that's kind of tailing behind it, and that front brings some drier air down here into Florida, but then you can see the tail end of it is allowing for moisture to impact the central Gulf states, even back into Texas. Some needed rain falling in the Dallas-Fort Worth area yesterday, and we may see a little bit more of that today. But this is great. This keeps things very quiet here across the northeastern United States. Dry air, warm temperatures in place here. Great day to do some barbecuing here across the Midwest and East. It is warm. We're looking at near record warmth in many places, but it is dry, and that trend continues here for a couple more days. Here is a look at the infrared. You can see right now Idalia, really the only thing on the map. Gert kind of getting sucked up into it. Pretty quiet here in the Western Atlantic, just the way we like it. Off of Africa, though, we've got some more waves emerging. This one certainly has potential to become a tropical system. The one after it we need to watch as well. And of course, we already had Katia move off of this area a little bit farther south and head in this direction, and our other disturbance heading in this direction. So getting busy here off of Africa. The phase of the Madden-Julian oscillation favors activity to be pretty high here coming off of Africa. A lot of moisture in place, some dry air to fight, but this is the time of the year when we see these waves that are long tracked coming across Africa. Now here's a look at the Eastern Atlantic, and I will show you all the features here real quick and where they're headed. This is the next wave, which I think will be Margot. Here's the one after it, which could be Nigel down the road. And then this is the area to watch for the time being. This is what looks to be Lee in a few days. Getting a little bit of wind shear from the east. That's keeping thunderstorms from developing in the center and staying there, but it's not far from tropical depression strength. As this wind shear out of the east relaxes in a couple of days, it has a pretty good chance of developing by the time it gets into here. Here's a closer look at our system here, 95L, and you can see it is growing. It's got outflow in all channels, which means it has the potential to become a storm that gets very big and very strong. But for the time being, the organization is still lacking. So not yet a tropical depression. Over time, I definitely think it will have that. But you can see there is, we've got thunderstorm activity from 8 degrees north all the way up to 15. So already a large system feeding in off of some very moist air in place. And the wind shear and some of the dry air behind it, really the only reason it hasn't developed yet. But give it a little bit more time, and I do think it is going to develop into our next tropical storm. Tomer Berg has a great page here showing kind of where the system came off. You can see it came off south of Senegal here and has tracked westward, and now is only up at about 11 degrees north. So still pretty far south here, just passing 30 west. So here's the Cape Verde Islands. Here is our system, and generally speaking, tracking just north of west. If the storm were heading over the Cape Verdes, it would not be any threat to anyone but the Eastern Atlantic. That's what we saw with Katia. If we're going farther south, it would be more of a Caribbean threat. But the fact that it's heading west-northwest means it is going to perhaps impact the northern Leeward Islands, the Virgin Islands, and Puerto Rico, and something we need to watch in not just the central Atlantic, but also the western Atlantic. Here's where the ensemble mean takes the system. You can see it doesn't have landfall in the Leeward Islands, but it is fairly close as a growing storm system. This is the ensemble prediction system and the Canadian model and the GFS ensemble forecast system, all of which showing kind of an average track here. What happens in a week is going to be where we start to see divergence in the models, with some turning it north towards Bermuda, others continuing a little farther west, getting a little bit closer to the Bahamas. Here's a look at the GFS ensemble. You can see obviously there's going to be uncertainty a week out, but several ensembles still show a threat here to the northeastern Caribbean, Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, the northern Leeward Islands, maybe even the far northern Windward Islands, although I think that may be a stretch. And you can also see Bermuda up in here needs to keep a very close eye on things. Now, what's expected to happen is our subtropical high is going to allow a window for the storm to turn to the right and head more on a northwest to even northerly track. How sharp that turn is going to be is still very uncertain. This is still 10 days away. And until we do see a very well-defined turn, we don't know exactly yet if this is going to be United States or a Bahamas threat, a Bermuda threat, or not even a threat where it turns even faster. You can see the GFS takes the system north-northwestward. And on this track, we need to watch it on the mid-Atlantic and northeastern coastlines. The mean of the ensembles is actually west of the operational model. So if you take all the ensembles, average them together, it is something that we would have to watch more carefully here in the Carolinas up into Virginia. One thing I think is for certain at this point, because the system looks like it'll develop in here, it's unlikely to track into the Caribbean and hit Hispaniola, Cuba, and Florida. I think it's more likely going to be East Coast or Bermuda or Central Atlantic fish storm than anything else. You can see the ensemble members, all of these that do develop the system, turn it into a hurricane in here around 55 west, and perhaps a major hurricane north of the Virgin Islands, northeast of Puerto Rico. We've got several ensemble members showing the pressure on this system will be down below 950 millibars. So a very good chance this becomes our third major hurricane of the season. Some chance it's a Category 4, and I would not rule out even a Category 5, although that may be a little bit extreme at this point. It certainly is a possibility based on how warm the waters have been. Here's the European ensemble guidance, and the good part about the European is it develops the system a little bit quicker, meaning it gains more latitude, and the southern solutions of the European ensembles keep the system to the north of the islands here on Saturday and Sunday. However, some continue it more towards the west as potentially a threat to the Turks and Caicos. The ensemble mean and the operational do say the storm is going to recurve near or south of Bermuda, which is right in here. Let me circle that for you guys to see here. So the European says at this point it is likely a fish storm as it's kind of turning away in this direction, but we still have some ensemble members coming up into here and a few going into here. So until we get into this area, we're not going to know for certain what we're dealing with as far as the future track goes. We just need to continue to keep an eye on things in the eastern United States, the Bahamas, even in this part of the Caribbean. Until everything is basically factored out of the equation, we cannot write the system off. So that's kind of where I'm going at this point. The Canadian ensemble, the control says Turks and Caicos, Southeast Bahamas need to watch. The ensemble mean says the turn happens near or just west of Bermuda. But obviously, the GFS is the farthest west, then the Canadian in between, then the European east of that. If I were making a forecast, while I never would say the Canadian is our best tropical model, I do think the average of all of the ensembles is the way to go with the forecast. And that puts it somewhere here around 70 west here by the middle of next week, by about the 14th or so, 13th or 14th. Here's the ensemble trend, and you can see here as I move this along with time, kind of just a feel for where the model ensemble guidance has taken everything. And you can see overall, there is certainly still a threat here to the Virgin Islands, the Leeward Islands, Puerto Rico, but the majority of the guidance has taken the storm a couple hundred miles to the north and east of you here. And this, by the way, time frame would be on the 9th and 10th of September, so early in the weekend. And then this is later this weekend. And then early next week, you can see obviously some divergence in the trends where we have some ensembles that do threaten Turks and Caicos on the 11th, others that say it's well to your east, and several that are aimed towards or even east of Bermuda after that. That's what I'm watching for you guys. Model ensemble tracks here in pretty good agreement, or model forecast tracks. All of the tropical models say this system's going to come within a couple hundred miles of the islands, but it will pass to the north of them. The intensity forecast, very uncertain, but all show strengthening here starting around midweek. Most showing this as at least a Category 2 hurricane, if not Category 3, some as a 4, and even one showing a Category 5. My official forecast at this point, although it's kind of early, would be Category 4, but I would not be shocked if it were ending up stronger. We'll have to see. The ship's forecast shows obvious intensification here with a 23% chance that this system grows by 75 miles per hour in 3 days or less, which is 4 times the climatological average. The ship's model says there's somewhat of a bend back to the west. This is not the model I trust when it comes to track, but I do trust it more for intensity. So it's very possible we have a major hurricane before this makes its way towards the Leeward Islands. That's what I'll be tracking for you guys. Now, the GFS model has struggled a lot with the main development region. It's struggled with formation of storms. However, it is maybe it's last to the race here, but it is showing up now, and it is showing an intense storm in the future. I'm going to show you where I think the system's going to track according to the GFS, and you can see it is going to be passing by to the north of the islands, around 21 north, 62 west. This is next Saturday night. And you can see the area of high pressure off to its north and east does have a weakness in it, allowing the storm to turn more to the north and west. That is what you would favor this time of the year. Now, there's a chance this ridge is farther west or farther east, and this forecast blows up. If the ridge is farther east, then this system turns east of Bermuda, and we have no threat. If this is farther west, then we need to watch it in the southeast and up the east coast. The GFS model says for the time being, there is a trough that moves through early next week to the northeast and breaks that ridge up and allows the system to make that turn to the north. Other models a little bit faster with that trough, a little bit farther east. But the one thing I wanted to point out for you guys here, and let me pull up my cursor so you can see what I'm talking about, is that after this trough moves through, the pattern very quickly gets progressive again, where we've got another large ridge of high pressure building into Ontario, Manitoba, and the Great Lakes. This will allow potentially low pressure to cut off in the plains. If that happens, we have a rebuilding ridge, and as that builds to the north of what should be lee, the steering currents on it become more uncertain, and we have a system that maybe can try to slow down somewhere in here and then has to make a decision. Is it going to try to come back towards the east coast, or is it going to go out to sea? And when a big region of high pressure is in place, that decision is not clear and cut at this point. So this is very much still something that the East Coast could be in play with. You can see this ridge builds in, and the GFS says next weekend, not this one coming up, but the one after, we do need to keep an eye on things on the East Coast. But again, this is one model run, and it can change, and it probably will. So if you're on the East Coast, this is not necessarily a fish storm. It is potentially a threat if you believe the GFS model. Now, if you believe the other models, that's not the case. Again, here's the GFS showing a very strong hurricane here or actually this Friday night. Shows another system behind it. This would be Tropical Storm Margot, and then maybe Lee after that. But you can see a very intense storm here making the turn, but not turning away just yet next week around this time. Getting close to Bermuda, but look at this big area of high pressure here. It is going to block this eastward progress. It misses this trough up in here next Thursday, the 14th, and then turns more to the north-northwest, which we did see, by the way, during Hurricane Sandy. We've seen it during Florence. We've seen it during storms like Floyd and Fran in the 90s. So very much, when you have a very strong area of high pressure building into the eastern U.S., you have more uncertainty. And at this point, not forecasting that this hurricane is going to hit New England or the mid-Atlantic, but what I am saying is it's not guaranteed to go out to sea either. We just have to keep a very close eye on it at this point. So yeah, that's what we're going to be watching here. This is a closer view of the GFS. This is where the system is expected to be on the 14th and 15th from our latest model run. You can see the run before it was faster and closer to the coast. The run before that was farther south but stronger. The run before that was again close to the East Coast. And the run before that was a little bit farther out. And the run before that was much weaker, which I don't think is going to be the case. So We're now seeing 6 straight runs where the East Coast needs to be watching it. The European model, on the other hand, does not have it being a threat. It has it strengthening quickly here down to category 2 or 3 strength on the 11th, maybe category 4 at this point, but this is closer to where Franklin tracked, and it has it turning away to the north and east, awfully south, far south, and maybe this comes back and hits Bermuda. So that's what we have to watch on the European. And then the Canadian model is in between the two, and I like to take the average at this point if I'm forecasting. I don't think it's strong enough yet, but you can see the Canadian starts that turn here at about 70 west, and that would certainly potentially threaten Bermuda, but Maine is also at 67 west, so this is still at the same longitude as it is with Cape Cod, and until it comes back this way, we just cannot write it off. Aaron Smith over here posted on Twitter that you can never guarantee a fish storm 5 days out. Here's a lesson we learned from Hurricane Florence in 2018. You can see that every model was showing it being a fish storm, and then the Europeans started a trend where it was going to come farther west. And after it moved past the Cape Verdes, this storm, by the way, much farther north than where I think Lee goes, you can see that every model had it coming by east of Bermuda. Now here begins to shift south of Bermuda, and then here's the shift coming back towards the East Coast. And this happened because a strong area of high pressure built into New England, which, oh, by the way, the GFS is showing. And then we had hurricane watches out, and then the hurricane warning, and then the slowing of the track, and a very uncertain path for Florence here as it stalled over the eastern Carolinas and produced some extreme amounts of rain. So until we know that it's going to be turning away from the coast, we certainly cannot rule things out. In the Western Pacific, things have been very active. Super Typhoon Saola, whatever it was, unfortunately hit Hong Kong as a very strong typhoon, then weakened west of Macau. We have another storm that hit Taiwan yesterday as a strong typhoon, and Haikui, and that one is now weakening to a tropical storm. It actually stalled on the west coast of Taiwan. Here you can see it right before it hit as a category 3, producing some extreme winds here over southeast Taiwan, then weakened and then slowed on the west coast. And now it should be moving in closer to the China coast here in the next half day today. Here you can see it spinning between Taiwan and China, producing extreme amounts of rain. My thoughts and prayers go out to everybody in this area impacted by this storm, by Typhoon Haikui, which should now be a tropical storm and hitting at about 50 to 60 miles per hour. Thank you all so much for watching today. Videos daily this week, right through the start of the weekend, as we look at what should be Lee here in a couple of days, and as we analyze the upper level pattern, how the storm grows, and where it may go. Again, way too soon to make any calls on this, but way too soon to rule things out either. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing and sharing with your friends. I do appreciate the support and the reach that we've seen here in the last few weeks, but it's not about me. I thank you, of course, and I'm glad that I'm growing here, but I give all the glory to God, who allows me to do this every day. I'm a Christian, and I've been called by God to be a meteorologist. I've done it for over 20 years. But I've also been shared to just tell everybody how great God is and what he means to me and what he's done in the lives of so many. He gave his son, Jesus Christ, to die on the cross so that we could have eternal life. People talk about how you live your life from life to death, but as a Christian, I will say you live your life from death to life, and that is eternal life. And today's Labor Day, and I know a lot of us may still be working. I mean, this is not my full-time gig here, but it is certainly a labor of love for me. And I know that a lot of people feel like the work that they're doing maybe doesn't matter. Well, in Philippians 2:13 to 16, that is not true. For it is God which worketh in you both to will and to do of his good pleasure. Do all things without murmurings and disputings, that ye may be blameless and harmless, the sons of God without rebuke in the midst of a crooked and perverse nation, among whom ye shine as lights in the world, holding forth the word of life, that I may rejoice in the day of Christ, that I have not run in vain, neither labored in vain. And if you are a believer like I am, I just want to encourage you to say that despite all the crookedness, all of the worldly divide that's out there, all of the laws of God that are being broken on a daily basis and yet passed off as correct, that you can shine in the light of the world, and that the work you are doing is not in vain, but you are doing meaningful work, and that is sharing with everybody that Christ is indeed alive and that he is coming again, and the will that you are doing pleases God. That what you are doing is pleasing God, and God pleasing, we all know, leads to many who rejoice in heaven when your day comes, and that is eternal life in the mansions of God. That is taking away the difficult life that you are living, the labor of love, but really just the difficult labor that you do on a daily basis. Maybe you're struggling with fractured relationships. Maybe you're struggling with a difficult work situation, or you're without work and having financial troubles. But know that the work you are doing does have light shining on it from God, and that if you turn and repent to God, he's going to work in you more and more as you continue to serve him, like I feel that I personally am serving you. So I'm happy to pray for you if you are one of those people who is struggling right now, who maybe is working really hard, dealing with physical pain, dealing with emotional pain. Just know that God is there for you. And I want to pray for you, because I think if we all pray together, then we can bring that light into our dark lives. I hope you all have a wonderful Labor Day, and we'll share with you again in the morning the future of Lee. God bless you, and see you then.